From a freezing New York apartment to the song that started it all. In the winter of 1963, a young couple huddled in a freezing New York apartment, dreaming of warmth and possibility. John Phillips, a folk musician with grand ambitions, and his wife, Michelle, a beautiful California blonde with a voice like honey, were struggling to make ends meet in the harsh reality of East Coast winters. As snow piled against their windows and their breath formed clouds in the unheated room, John picked up his guitar and began to play a melody that would soon become the anthem of a generation. "All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray," he sang, his voice carrying the weight of longing for something more than the cold concrete jungle surrounding them. Michelle, wrapped in a blanket and sipping lukewarm coffee, listened as her husband's fingers found the chord progression that would eventually transport millions of listeners to sun-drenched California beaches and palm-lined boulevards. The song that would become California Dreaming wasn't born from inspiration alone, it was born from desperation. John Phillips had been chasing the folk music dream for years, moving from group to group, always on the verge of something bigger but never quite breaking through. The new Journeymen, his previous trio, had shown promise but dissolved like so many other folk acts of the early 60s. Now, trapped in a Manhattan winter that seemed to stretch endlessly, he found himself pouring his longing for escape into music. Michelle, born Holly Michelle Gilliam in Long Beach, California, understood that longing in a way that only a native Californian could. She had tasted the sweetness of Pacific breezes and felt the warmth of year-round sunshine on her skin. As she listened to John work out the melody that cold December morning, she could almost smell the orange blossoms and hear the distant crash of waves against the Malibu shore. But this wasn't just homesickness, it was something deeper. The song they were creating together captured the universal human desire for transformation, for the possibility that somewhere else, life could be different, better, more beautiful. California had become, in the American imagination, the place where dreams came true, where the weather was always perfect, and where young people could reinvent themselves against a backdrop of endless summer. The lyrics came naturally, almost as if they were channeling the collective unconscious of a generation ready to reject the cold conformity of the 1950s in favor of something warmer, more colorful, more free. "I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA," John sang, and Michelle could hear in his voice not just their personal longing, but the yearning of countless young Americans who felt trapped by convention and climate alike. As the song took shape over the following weeks, it became clear that they had stumbled upon something special. This wasn't just another folk song. It was a manifesto, a declaration of independence from everything that was gray and cold and limiting. The harmony they created together, her crystalline soprano floating above his warm baritone, seemed to embody the very essence of California sunshine. They couldn't have known, as they sat in that freezing apartment working out the final verses, that they were creating more than just a song. They were crafting the blueprint for an entire aesthetic, a sound that would define not just their own future success, but the entire California music scene of the 1960s. The song they were writing would eventually become the calling card for a group that didn't even exist yet, performed by voices that hadn't yet learned to blend in perfect harmony. In many ways, California Dreaming was prophetic. It predicted their own journey westward, their own escape from the confines of East Coast folk music into something bigger, more expansive, more golden. The song was their ticket to the promised land, their musical passport to a world where palm trees swayed in eternal breeze and where four voices could create something that sounded like heaven itself. As winter slowly gave way to spring and the song continued to evolve, John and Michelle Phillips began to dream not just of California, but of the group they would form there, the harmonies they would create, and the mansion in the hills where their musical dreams would finally come true. The birth of that song in a freezing New York apartment was really the birth of the mamas and the papas themselves. They just didn't know it yet.
Chapter 2. Go Where You Wanna Go, The Migration West. The winding journey from folk obscurity to Los Angeles dreams. The Phillips' journey to California wasn't a straight line from New York to Los Angeles. Like many seekers of the 1960s, they wandered through the folk scene, collecting musical partners and experiences along the way. John had already been part of the new Dreamin, a folk trio that showed promise but never quite caught fire. Michelle, born Holly Michelle Gilliam in Long Beach, had returned to her native California soil, but not before the couple had crisscrossed the country, playing small venues and dreaming of something bigger. Their migration west was part of a larger cultural movement that was reshaping American music in the mid-1960s. The folk revival that had begun in the late 1950s was evolving, becoming more electric, more pop-oriented, more commercially viable. Bob Dylan had already shocked the folk purists by going electric at the Newport Folk Festival, and the Beatles had proven that thoughtful songwriting could coexist with mass appeal. The time was right for a new kind of music that could bridge the gap between the intellectual honesty of folk and the emotional immediacy of pop. John Phillips understood this shift better than most. Born in South Carolina but raised in Virginia, he had been drawn to music from an early age, learning guitar and developing a songwriter's ear for melody and harmony. His early bands had been solidly within the folk tradition, but he possessed an innate understanding of what made a song commercially viable. He could hear the potential in a melody, could sense how a harmony might lift a song from good to great. Michelle's journey to music had been different but equally significant. Growing up in Los Angeles, she had been exposed to the California sound from its earliest days, absorbing the influence of the Beach Boys' harmonies and the laid-back aesthetic that would later define the entire West Coast scene. Her voice, pure and clear as mountain air, had been trained in the relaxed, conversational style that would become synonymous with California folk rock. Their first major stop on the road to Los Angeles was actually a step backward geographically. They found themselves in the Virgin Islands of all places, where John had been hired to perform at various resorts and hotels. It was there, in the tropical paradise that seemed like a preview of the California dream, that they began to refine their sound and develop the musical partnership that would later blossom into something extraordinary. The Virgin Islands gig was more than just a job. It was a laboratory for experimentation. Away from the pressures of the New York folk scene, John and Michelle had the freedom to explore different sounds, different harmonies, different ways of presenting their music. They began to understand how their voices worked together, how Michelle's ethereal soprano could float above John's more grounded baritone, creating a sound that was both earthly and celestial. It was also during this period that they began to develop their visual aesthetic. The tropical setting encouraged a more relaxed, colorful approach to performance, a departure from the serious, often somber presentation that characterized much of the folk scene. Michelle, with her natural California beauty and fashion sense, began to experiment with flowing fabrics and vibrant colors that would later become part of the Mamas and the Papas' signature look. But the Virgin Islands were just a way station. The real destination was always California, the place where dreams came true and where the perfect weather provided the ideal backdrop for the perfect sound. By 1965, they had made the decision to head west, driving across the country in a used car loaded with guitars, dreams, and the demo recordings that would eventually change their lives. The drive itself was an adventure, a cross-country odyssey that took them through the heart of America and into the promised land of California. They drove through the desert Southwest, watching the landscape gradually transform from the familiar forests of the East to the alien beauty of the Mojave, until finally they crested the San Gabriel Mountains and saw Los Angeles spread out below them like a glittering carpet of possibility. Their first apartment in Los Angeles was nothing special, a small place in the Hollywood Hills that they shared with another aspiring musician. But it was California, and that made all the difference. The air was warm and clean, the sky was perpetually blue, and everywhere they looked, they saw other young people who had come west to pursue their dreams. The folk scene in Los Angeles was different from New York, more relaxed, more open to experimentation, more willing to embrace the kind of harmony-rich sound that John and Michelle were developing. It was in Los Angeles that they began to meet the other musicians who would eventually become part of their musical family. The folk clubs of the Sunset Strip, places like the Troubadour and the Whiskey A Go-Go, were breeding grounds for new talent, and John and Michelle quickly became part of the scene, attending shows, making connections, and gradually building the network of relationships that would lead to the formation of the Mamas and the Papas. The migration west wasn't just geographical, it was spiritual, emotional, and artistic. In leaving the East Coast behind, John and Michelle Phillips weren't just changing their address, they were transforming themselves from struggling folk musicians into architects of a new kind of American music. The California dream they had sung about in that freezing New York apartment was becoming reality, one harmony at a time.
Chapter 3. Monday, Monday, Finding Mama Cass and Papa Denny. How 4 distinct voices became one legendary sound. The transformation from John and Michelle Phillips to the Mamas and the Papas required more than just a change of geography. It demanded the perfect chemistry of 4 distinct personalities. The process of finding the right voices to complete their sound was like assembling a musical puzzle, where each piece had to fit perfectly with the others to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Enter Ellen Naomi Cohen, better known as Mama Cass Elliot, a powerhouse vocalist from Baltimore with a voice that could fill a cathedral and a personality that could light up a room. Cass's journey to Los Angeles had been equally circuitous, having performed with various folk groups, including the Big Three and the Mugwumps. At nearly 300 pounds, she was hardly the typical image of a 1960s pop star. But her voice was pure magic, rich, warm, and emotionally resonant in a way that could make grown men weep. Cass had grown up in Baltimore, the daughter of a delicatessen owner, and her childhood had been marked by both musical talent and personal struggle. She had been singing since she was a child, but her size had always made her feel like an outsider, even in the accepting world of folk music. What she lacked in conventional beauty, however, she more than made up for in talent and charisma. Her voice was an instrument of extraordinary range and power, capable of delivering both tender ballads and soaring anthems with equal conviction. The Mugwumps, the group that had brought Cass to national attention, also included another crucial piece of the puzzle: Dennis Dougherty, the Canadian charmer with the golden voice who would become the final member of the Mamas and the Papas. Denny, as he was known to his friends, possessed a tenor voice of remarkable clarity and emotional depth. Born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, he had been part of the Canadian folk scene before making his way to New York and eventually to Los Angeles. Denny's voice was the perfect complement to the Phillips harmonies. Where John provided the rhythmic foundation and Michelle the ethereal top notes, Denny filled the crucial middle range, his tenor weaving through the other voices like golden thread through a tapestry. More than that, he possessed a natural charm and stage presence that made him an ideal frontman, capable of connecting with audiences in a way that was both intimate and universal. The formation of the Mamas and the Papas wasn't the result of a formal audition process or a carefully planned business venture. Instead, it was the organic result of friendship, musical compatibility, and the kind of serendipity that seemed to define the Los Angeles music scene of the mid-1960s. John and Michelle had met Cass and Denny through the interconnected web of folk musicians who populated the clubs and coffee houses of both coasts. The first time all four voices came together was at a small gathering in someone's apartment, probably in the Hollywood Hills, where informal jam sessions were a regular occurrence. John was playing guitar, working through some new material, when the others began to add their voices. What happened next was pure magic, the kind of moment that musicians dream about but rarely experience. The harmony that emerged from their first informal session was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It wasn't just that their voices blended well, it was that they seemed to complete each other, creating a sound that was rich, complex, and emotionally overwhelming. John's baritone provided the foundation, Michelle's soprano soared above, Cass's alto anchored the middle, and Denny's tenor wove through it all, creating a tapestry of sound that was both contemporary and timeless. The group's name came from the song they were working on, California Dreaming, which John had written with Michelle back in New York. The lyric, "All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray," had become their unofficial motto, and the idea of mamas and papas suggested the kind of familial warmth and intimacy that characterized their sound. They weren't just a band, they were a musical family, complete with all the love, conflict, and complexity that families entail. Each member brought something unique to the group dynamic. John was the leader, the primary songwriter and arranger, with a vision for what the group could become. Michelle was the beauty, the California dream made flesh, with a voice that could make angels weep. Cass was the soul, the emotional center of the group, whose powerful voice could convey both joy and heartbreak with equal conviction. And Denny was the heart, the charming Canadian whose voice and personality provided the perfect bridge between the others. The chemistry between them was immediately apparent to anyone who heard them perform. Their voices didn't just blend, they conversed, creating a musical dialogue that was both intimate and universal. By the end of 1965, it was clear that they had found something special. The four voices that had come together almost by accident had created a sound that was uniquely their own, a harmony that would soon captivate the world and define the California sound for generations to come. The Mamas and the Papas had been born, and the music world would never be the same.
Chapter 4. Dedicated to the one I love, the Bel Air Sanctuary. Inside the mansion that became the headquarters of California Dreaming, by 1966, success had afforded John and Michelle Phillips something most musicians could only dream of: a sprawling Bel Air mansion that would become the unofficial headquarters of the Mamas and the Papas. The house at 783 Bel Air Road wasn't just a residence, it was a creative sanctuary where the group's distinctive sound was born, nurtured, and perfected. With its panoramic views of Los Angeles spread out below like a glittering carpet, the mansion provided the perfect backdrop for the California dreaming aesthetic that would define their music. The mansion itself was a testament to the rapid success that had transformed four struggling folk musicians into pop superstars almost overnight. California Dreaming had become a massive hit, climbing to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and establishing the group as a major force in popular music. The money that flowed from that success and the hits that followed allowed John and Michelle to purchase not just a house, but a palace, a 10,000 square foot Mediterranean-style villa perched high in the hills above Beverly Hills. The approach to the house was dramatic, winding up through carefully manicured gardens and past a series of terraced lawns that seemed to cascade down the hillside like green waterfalls. The front entrance, with its massive wooden doors and stone archway, suggested both luxury and artistic sensibility. But it was the interior that truly captured the essence of what the mamas and the papas were all about. The living room was the heart of the house, a vast space with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city below. The room was furnished with an eclectic mix of antiques and contemporary pieces, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and comfortable. Persian rugs covered the hardwood floors, and the walls were adorned with artwork that John and Michelle had collected during their travels. But the most important feature of the living room was its acoustics. The high ceilings and hardwood floors created a natural resonance that was perfect for vocal harmony. John had recognized this immediately, and the room quickly became an informal recording studio where the group would spend hours crafting their intricate vocal arrangements. The grand piano, positioned near the windows to take advantage of the natural light, became the centerpiece of their creative process. Michelle would later describe these sessions as magical, with the four voices blending together as naturally as the California sunshine streaming through the windows. The house itself seemed to inspire their music, with each room offering a different acoustic environment and a different mood. The library, with its dark wood paneling and built-in bookshelves, was perfect for more intimate acoustic sessions. The sunroom, with its glass walls and tropical plants, provided a lighter, more airy sound.
Chapter 5. Creek Alley, the creative process. Inside the Bel Air mansion, creativity didn't just happen, it bloomed like wildflowers in every forgotten corner. John would rise before dawn, tiptoeing through quiet hallways to the piano, melodies chasing each other through his mind. Often he'd scribble lyrics by candlelight, the room still heavy with sleep and yesterday's laughter. Cass, drawn by the faint music, would drift in next, still wrapped in her nightgown. Her voice, rough from sleep, carried a magic that startled them both. Soon Michelle would wander in, hair tangled, eyes bright, humming counter melodies that twined delicately around Cass's notes. Denny might pad in with a grin, cradling his guitar. By mid-morning, the house vibrated with layered harmonies and half-finished thoughts that might turn into hits. It was chaos that felt like ritual. John thrived on tiny experiments, changing a single chord, nudging a harmony higher, asking Cass to drop into her smoky lower register just to see what happened. They'd break into laughter when it clashed, then try again, determined to chase down perfection. The house itself seemed to encourage it, windows thrown wide to catch breezes that carried birdsong and distant city noise into their sessions. When they finally laid down Creek Alley, it felt like a diary set to music. The song was playful, sly, stuffed with winks at old friends and sly nods to failures turned fortune. Every line was a breadcrumb from their past, New York folk clubs, island escapades, the tumble of friendships and bands that didn't last. Yet beneath the clever lyrics was a pulse of genuine wonder. How had four voices from scattered corners of the continent collided so perfectly here in California? Nights often ended in the garden, voices blending under lanterns and stars, wine glasses tipped toward the moon. Those evenings were their secret recipe, where affection and minor rivalries simmered down into trust. In those moments, it felt like they could keep spinning gold forever. Chapter 6. I Saw Her Again, Love, Betrayal, and Musical Genius. Yet not all that the mansion held was joy. As the band's success soared, tensions tangled like vines. The biggest fracture came quietly at first. Furtive looks, long silences, then stolen moments between Michelle and Denny that neither could disguise for long. When John learned of the affair, it was as if a fault line cracked beneath them. Cass tried to soothe everyone, using her humor to patch over wounds, but the hurt ran deep. John, ever the craftsman, poured his anguish into music. I Saw Her Again emerged not as a condemnation, but a strangely buoyant confession. Its upbeat, almost teasing melody belied lyrics raw with personal truth. Recording it was an emotional minefield. John, demanding as ever, pushed for take after take, forcing them all to relive the betrayal while chasing flawless execution. The studio sessions stretched late into the night. Cass would throw her arms around Michelle between takes, whispering encouragement. Denny, caught in a guilt he struggled to voice, sang with a naked edge that made the track shimmer with uneasy brilliance. Sometimes, John would close his eyes at the console, hands pressed to his temples, listening not just for notes out of place, but for cracks in their fragile unity. Outside the studio, the mansion felt it too. Shared breakfasts were quieter, the old easy banter dulled. Yet somehow, when they sang, the pain became alchemy. Listeners heard only joy, felt only sunshine, unaware that beneath the golden harmonies lay fresh bruises. Over time, the wounds scarred over, but never quite healed. Their creative flame burned even hotter for it, paradoxically fueled by heartbreak and regret. In I Saw Her Again, they captured something uniquely human, a contradiction of betrayal wrapped in irresistible melody. It became a mirror for their tangled lives, proving that sometimes the most exquisite art grows from the deepest fractures. Chapter 7. Safe in My Garden, The Peak Years. Between 1966 and 1968, the Bel Air Mansion wasn't simply a residence or a recording studio. It was a vibrant, creative sanctuary where the mamas and the papas reached the zenith of their musical journey. This period marked the pinnacle of their collective artistry, blending the radiant California sun with their unique sound and personal stories that shaped their music. Mornings in the mansion were slow to awaken. Light spilled through the towering windows, casting warm pools of gold on the hardwood floors. The air smelled of fresh citrus and coffee brewing in the kitchen, where Cass Elliot often took command, preparing lavish breakfasts that nourished the body and soul. Her laughter was a staple ingredient, echoing off the walls as she hummed new melodies while chopping fruit or stirring pots. Michelle, barefoot and graceful, drifted through the rooms like a dancer in a dream, her voice growing ever more assured and nuanced. John, relentless and driven, prowled the house from room to room, a notebook in hand, scribbling lyrics, tweaking melodies, always searching for that elusive perfection. Denny balanced between the two, his easy charm and steady tenor voice providing an emotional anchor during sessions that could be intense and exhausting. Their days were a mixture of deep focus and carefree moments. They spent hours layering harmonies in the mansion's airy living room, experimenting with vocal textures and instrumental arrangements. Sessions could stretch into the early morning, fueled by cigarettes, wine, and bursts of creative energy. The mansion itself seemed alive with music, walls absorbing every note, every whispered harmony, every burst of laughter or frustration. Safe in My Garden emerged from this fertile environment as a tender invitation to find peace and sanctuary amid the chaos swirling outside their walls. The song's delicate arrangement and heartfelt lyrics mirrored the dual nature of their lives, a balance of turmoil and tranquility. Their voices intertwined in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, weaving a protective cocoon for themselves and their listeners. But behind the music, the pressures of fame and the complexities of their relationships simmered beneath the surface. The mansion witnessed moments of joy, but also episodes of conflict and vulnerability. Late-night arguments gave way to heartfelt reconciliations, and the line between work and personal life often blurred. Friends from the music world often stopped by, filling the rooms with stories, laughter, and the rich hum of camaraderie. These gatherings were both a source of inspiration and occasional distraction, adding to the vibrant tapestry of their days. Despite the challenges, the mamas and the papas remained committed to their shared vision. The mansion became a symbol of their journey, a place where four distinct personalities melded into a singular, powerful voice that captured the spirit of an era.
Chapter 8: Words of Love, the Legacy. As the decade turned and the cultural landscape shifted, the mamas and the papas found themselves at a crossroads. The intense camaraderie and creative synergy that had defined their rise began to fray under the strain of changing personal dynamics and the relentless demands of the music industry. Words of Love stands as a poignant closing chapter, both musically and personally. The song reflects a bittersweet farewell, a tender acknowledgement of love's enduring power even as paths diverge. Its gentle harmonies and evocative lyrics carry the weight of years spent together, the triumphs, the heartaches, and the shared dreams. The once bustling Bel Air mansion slowly quieted as members pursued solo ventures and new directions. Michelle explored acting and solo music, bringing the essence of the mamas and the papas with her into new realms. John's songwriting and production talents flourished, influencing countless artists and defining the sound of a generation. Cass, with her powerful presence and warm voice, embraced new musical challenges until her untimely passing. Denny continued his musical journey, his voice a lingering echo of the group's golden era. Though the band's time together waned, their music continued to resonate deeply. Their songs became timeless anthems of youth, hope, and the eternal allure of California dreaming. They captured moments of joy, struggle, and vulnerability in a way that remains profoundly relatable. The mansion, their once thriving creative hub, now stands as a silent testament to their legacy. Its walls hold memories of laughter, tears, late-night sessions, and the magic that happens when four voices come together in harmony. The story of the mamas and the papas is a reminder of the transformative power of music, the way it can shape lives, reflect eras, and connect souls across generations. Their harmonies live on, an enduring call to dream, to love, and to find your own sanctuary in the world.